Okay, so now let's talk about one of the biggest transitions in evolutionary history, and that's the evolution of tetrapods. So, tetrapods are four-limb vertebrates. They include amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. But where did they come from? So, the story begins in the water. So, around 375 million years ago, some lobe-finned fishes began to develop adaptations for life on land. And these fish, like the extinct Tiktaalik, had strong bony fins that could support their body weight in shallow water or mud flats. The Tiktaalik is a famous transitional fossil because it had features of both fish and early amphibians. So it had gills, scales, and fins, but it also had a flat head with eyes on top, it had a neck, and limb-like bones in the fins. So over time, these early tetrapods moved on to land, where they continued evolving to cope with new challenges, like breathing air, supporting their bodies without buoyancy, and reproducing in a dry environment. So this led to the development of lungs, weight-bearing limbs, and eventually amniotic eggs in reptiles and mammals. So the fossil record shows this gradual shift from aquatic to terrestrial life, and life forms like the Eucanthostica and Ichthyostega, which had both gills and lungs, as well as multiple digits in their limbs. So tetrapod evolution is a textbook example of descent with modification, where each new adaptation built on ancestral traits to fit a new environment. So another dramatic evolutionary story is the evolution of whales, a complete reversal from land back to water. So modern whales are marine mammals, but their ancestors actually lived on land. And the evidence for this comes from fossils, genetics, and comparative anatomy. So the earliest known whale ancestor is the Pakicetus, lived around 50 million years ago and looked like a dog-sized land mammal with features linking it to whales, like specific ear bone structures used for hearing underwater. Over time, transitional species like the Ambulocetus, meaning walking whale, shows limbs adapted for swimming and still capable of walking on land. So, as the whale ancestors became more aquatic, their nostrils migrated to the top of their heads, eventually forming their blowholes, and their limbs became flippers. And their rear legs also shrank dramatically. So fossils from one of the first fully aquatic whales from about 40 million years ago still show tiny hand limbs, no longer used for walking, but a clear vestige of their land-dwelling past. Genetics also supports this, so whales share a common ancestor with hippos. And the evolutionary path of whales is an incredibly well-documented case of major anatomical transformation. This is really showcasing natural selection's power over millions of years. So this brings us to biological evidence, another powerful support for evolution. So biogeography is the study of how and where organisms live. The patterns of species distribution support the idea that species evolve in one region and then spread out, rather than being randomly placed. So Darwin himself observed this. So for instance, South America has environments that are suitable for rabbits, yet no rabbits live there. Why? Because rabbits evolved somewhere else and had no natural way to reach South America. The distribution of marsupials adds more depth to this picture. So millions of years ago, South America, Antarctica, and Australia were connected as part of this southern supercontinent. So marsupials like kangaroos and possums and placental mammals both arose at the same time. When Australia drifted away, it carried its marsupial populations with it, isolating them from the competition posed by the placentals. As a result, marsupials flourished in Australia while placentals dominated everywhere else. So in fact, the possum is the only marsupial native to America today. Even more interesting, marsupial and placental mammals sometimes look and behave similar despite being unrelated. This is again another sign of convergent evolution where different evolutionary paths led to similar adaptations in response to similar environments. So now let's talk about anatomical evidence, which is a key piece of evolutionary puzzle. So let's first talk about vestigial structures. So these are body parts that are reduced in size and no longer serve their original function, but are still present because they were inherited from an ancestor. So whales and snakes have remnants of hip bones and hind limbs, even though they don't use them. In humans, we have a tailbone, which is a leftover from ancestors with tails. Ostriches, which can't fly, still have wings. So these vestiges make no sense unless you understand them in the context of common descent. They're leftovers from a shared evolutionary path. Then there's homologous structures. So these are body parts that may serve different functions in different species, but were built from the same basic components. So all vertebrate forelimbs, whether it's a bat's wing, a cat's leg, a whale's flipper, or even our human arm, contain the same set of bones. We have a humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So this shows they evolved from a common ancestor, even though evolution shaped them for very different functions. In contrast, we have analogous structures like a bird's wing and an insect's wing, which serve the same purpose, like for flight, but evolved independently and are built very differently. Okay, so now we can talk about structural similarities in more detail with a few specific examples. So take the bird and the bat. Both fly, but their wings evolved independently. So bats are mammals and birds are avian reptiles. So their wings are analogous, meaning that they're similar in function, but not from a common winged ancestor. However, both have the same basic limb bone layout as all tetrapods, so their internal structures are homologous, while the wings as a whole are not. So evolution has repurposed the same bones in two different ways. So now let's compare the whale and the cat, and you'll find a lot of similarities in bone structure despite the obvious differences in their lifestyles. So whales use flippers to swim, and cats use paws to walk and hunt. Yet both animals have forelimbs with the same set of bones arranged in the exact same order. And this isn't a coincidence. It's a classic case of homology, so showing that they share a common ancestor even though their limbs have adapted to different uses over time. So finally, let's look at horse and human. These two seem very different on the surface. One gallops on hooves, the other walks upright on two legs. But our skeletal anatomy, particularly in the limbs, tells us a different story. So we both have the same number and types of limb bones. They've just been modified over time. So in horses, the middle toe became enlarged to form a single hoof, while in humans, our limbs adapted for grasping and tool use. Again, this is evidence of shared ancestry and how natural selection can take the same starting materials and shape them in vastly different ways depending on the environment and the function.